Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining for our final Yes Speaker series of today, featuring Gilbert Li, who will share a talk about simple and effective design. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Rgd Handbook, and I'm the chair at the School of Design. Before we get started, we would like to acknowledge that the land on which George Brown College is situated is the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation and other Indigenous peoples who have lived on this land. Today, the meeting place of Toronto is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to work in the community and on this territory. Across the School of Design, we remain committed to identifying and removing systemic barriers to accessing college programs and services, and are committed to identifying strategies, tools, and actions to better support our Indigenous student population. In a commitment to build connections and opportunities for students to engage with design's visionaries, Yes features a week-long lecture series, 18 to be exact. The design-focused speaker series has been cultivated in an effort to provide dynamic perspectives and unique discussion opportunities for members of our community, including students and faculty alike. Honest advice for designers from really good designers connects the School of Design with those who have impacted the industry on a local and global scale through a focused thematic lecture. This is followed by an opportunity for conversation and dialogue using the YouTube chat. Please feel free to relay all of your questions for Gilbert there. With that, I am proud to introduce Gilbert Li. After a decade learning from very smart and talented people, Gilbert Li graduated from the School of Hard Knocks and founded the Office of Gilbert Li in 2004. From pocket-sized brochures to coffee table books, the Toronto-based design studio is renowned for its work with leading cultural, nonprofit, and institutional clients such as the Art Gallery of Ontario, Metcalf Foundation, and the University of Toronto. In addition to leading his design team, Gilbert teaches part-time and always thinks about what's for lunch. Moderating the Q&A portion of today's session is graphic design graduate Brendan Irving. With an interest in branding and editorial design, he believes that design has the potential to give meaning to an increasingly visual world. Passionate about printed matter, his thesis project saw the creation of both a newspaper and small series which explore the intersections between design and history. Items such as stamps, postcards, and other ephemera were carefully curated and analyzed as evidence of Ontario's past. In his free time, Brendan enjoys engaging with the greater design community by participating in events such as the Swash and Serif Typography Show, hosted by the Toronto Design Directory. He also enjoys making zines, drawing, and listening to electronic music. Welcome, Brendan. With that, I am pleased to turn it over to Gilbert, who's going to start his presentation.
Thanks, Anna-Rita, and everyone at the School of Design for inviting me today. I hope your first day has been going well. I'm really pleased to show some of our studio's work around the theme of nowhere to hide, expressing the complex simply and confidently. I hope in showing some of our work, you'll be able to take away, some, best practices and, some principles that you can apply to your own work going forward, in terms of how simplicity in design doesn't mean dumbing down your design or, compromising on how effective or engaging the work is. Before we dive in, I was just going to do my own introduction, but Anna-Rita did such a great job. So suffice it to say, I have a small design studio here in Toronto, the Office of Gilbert Li, that I founded in 2004. This is our meeting room, and you can see at a glance the kind of work we do. It's mostly print-based, lots of editorial projects, but we also do marketing campaigns and print communications. The current team at our studio is Alina's our design director, and Connor and Sarah are two designers, and together we, work together closely even through this, unusual pandemic time. So with that, let's get started. Here's a quote that I think about quite often from Albert Einstein. If you can't explain it to a 6-year-old, you don't understand it well enough. It's often even paraphrased as if you can't explain something simply, you don't understand what you're talking about. And I think this is a good adage and a good principle to hold as a designer in terms of how you communicate and talk about your design. And often I find if I can't explain my design simply, then probably the design itself is a bit too complicated. So in the following projects, spanning a range of from like the beginning of the studio to present day, I hope these projects can demonstrate how you can learn how, in simplifying the design, we didn't compromise on how effective the results were. This is the ideas. It was a journal published by the Faculty of Arts and Science at U of T. It was, in fact, the very first project that our studio had back when it was just me. And a lot of the things, the kind of aesthetic approach to typography, approach to design, kind of I believe carry through to this day, even though this was like oh my gosh, like 16 years ago. Unlike many university publications that tend to be more marketing oriented or some form of a newsletter, Ideas was conceived as a along the lines of an academic journal, in that all of the content is written by actual researchers at the U of T, not by professional writers. And the idea was, since the arts and science faculty is the largest faculty at U of T, covering, departments such as, astronomy to mathematics and all sorts of fields in science, all the way to zoology. They would tackle different topics in a cross-disciplinary way, and each issue would be devoted to one topic. Given the audience wasn't like a general audience, it was very much a very select group of people to start with, of other academics, other researchers, and eventually opened up to being a subscription-based publication. We didn't have to concern ourselves with the way a retail magazine would need to design its cover or attract a broad audience. The goal from the beginning was to show through Ideas that to create a space for something for longer form reading, for serious ideas to be discussed and analyzed. As you can see, this is the first cover of the first issue. We wanted to create the design in a very quiet manner, and let literally the ideas speak for themselves. So the design strategy was we would not have the topic or the theme of the issue actually printed as a title or cover cut line. It would be totally reliant on the imagery to tell the story. And being a non-retail magazine, we had all sorts of available real estate to utilize. So normally the back cover in many magazines are saved for advertising, same with the inside front and back covers, but we had all of that real estate to use as an extension of the front cover. So you can see here, this issue is about suburban sprawl and urban design. The image on the front by itself communicates that strongly, but with the addition of the back cover, it really all of a sudden provides a really specific point of view and creates a dialogue between these two images. Here's another example of a cover. It's not, in this case, it's very graphic, and it has a vaguely, science-y kind of feel, and it's actually appropriate. It is a science-themed issue, all about making what was previously invisible, or at least invisible to the naked eye, visible. So this explored scale in terms of, like, things smaller than usually perceptible, all the way to things that are so large it's impossible to kind of mentally conceive of them. So this image is actually shows that the kind of evidence of an atom moving. And then on the inside, as you flip, you're confronted, I don't know if you can see it, there's like a little numeral 0, and it relates to this poem about quarks. Quarks are a subatomic particle, so kind of like the smallest element in the known universe, and it relates to that idea and equating it to a 0. Here is an issue on human rights and freedom of expression. The cover features a photograph of a woman in Afghanistan. This is taken like in the early 2000s, just before Afghanistan allowed women to vote for the very first time. And like many very orthodox Muslim countries, women have to be kept shrouded. So the woman here, not wearing a veil, like needed to use her hands to cover herself before being able, before the photographer could take her portrait. And this contrasts with this other photograph by the same photographer that we used on the inside cover. It's like the day of the elections, and the photographer found this woman, or spotted this woman actually, quite bravely and removing her shroud in public, which is in contrast to the women who remain shrouded next to her. I wanted to show an example of the inside, and I'll show more. This is a feature article on in an issue having to do with memory. Dave Kemp is an artist who worked with a physicist who's experimenting with using extreme macro photography using an electron microscope. Dave had this idea of photographing photographs themselves, and to reveal kind of like the beauty of like the extreme close-up, in this case of the side edge of a photograph. You see the layers of the photographic paper, and then on the top is kind of the photographic emulsion. So this whole other view of photographs than what people normally would identify with. But in this, like, small photo essay, we don't actually ever reveal what the actual photograph looks like. So when in working with Dave, I actually asked him, what is the photograph? And he told me this amazing story. He was looking through his father's belongings and found this kind of diary journal that he kept while serving the Canadian military during World War II. And he's leafing through this old journal, and in the back inside back cover, there was like a pocket, and out slipped old photograph of his dad as a young man. And so that's in fact the photograph that he takes of the microscopic edge profile of. So we worked together and we thought, let's stage that. And because it had such resonance to the overall theme of memory, this idea of memory is something that, could be hidden away or deeply buried in one's subconscious. And when that memory, kind of reawakens, is kind of random and can be surprising. Here's another cover where we kind of utilize the front and back to, create that dialogue. This issue is on kind of like ongoing debates or conflicts, standoffs. So we hired a collage artist to create this uh, double page spread kind of cover with like these two dogs, facing off with each other. And to walk through on the inside, being an academic journal, most of the content was text, not that much imagery, but whenever we had imagery, the idea was it should be able to act almost independently of the text. So there's not a lot of not kind of like layouts with like, typography layered over type, even things like captions generally, stay off of images. Images are full bleed and contained on their own page. And in terms of the typography, it by and large stuck to a very, very consistent template and system with very little deviation. This feature shows the kind of deviation we would make here, given the topic of the ongoing Palestinian-Israeli conflict. The idea was to split the page in half vertically, and the text, doesn't, stays within the lower half of the page, and when we have imagery, we create these diptychs where they stack on top of each other to graphically show that division between the two sides. And here's a pretty typical layout of a feature article. You can see straight text. The only little trick is that sidebar in the bottom right corner. Not sorry, pull quote in the bottom right corner. But otherwise, it follows the basic layout used throughout. Here's a feature on the ongoing conflict between First Nations over their right to self-governance and control over the land. So again, we work carefully with the editor and all of our contributors on imagery, and as you can see, when we use images, they just stand alone and really, can tell the story kind of in parallel to all of the text. And it creates a very smooth, kind of calm and quiet reading experience for the audience. And hopefully that means they're better able to, develop their own ideas, have their own kind of like dialogue with the content in as direct a manner as possible. And here's a feature on like the conflict between US and China over foreign policy. And the imagery we commissioned illustrator Yarik Wetzel, who's, this is like, 15 plus years ago, who's become like a studio friend and regular collaborator for us. So with this project, there's some kind of key takeaways I'd like to point out in maybe something you can apply to your own design. first and foremost, you along with the client should really understand and respect the audience. There's kind of where designers feel they need to add things, spruce things up, make things more easily understood. It sometimes kind of muddles your design. So if you know if possible, like try to assume the best of your audience. Give them give them the benefit of a doubt that they can figure things out, or you develop the design that's intriguing enough that they'll do a bit of digging around to kind of you know dig deeper into the content to get a fuller understanding of the project. And this seems simple, but it's surprisingly not followed enough. That that old saying of a picture is worth 1,000 words. It can be, but as a designer, it's your job to make sure, like the images are chosen and used wisely to their full benefit. The next project is a kind of like a marketing campaign we developed for Art with Heart. It's a annual art auction that raises funds for Casey House, a hospital specializing in HIV AIDS care. What's unique about this auction is all of the art is made specifically for this auction. So it's not artists who have, or galleries who have art that's unsold and they donate that to this auction. It's planned like, almost a year in advance. There's a person at Casey House who, works with the art community, and these artists, at the beginning, agree to create a work specifically for the auction. So they're quite generous with their time and obviously with the art that they donate. We thought for the campaign, in there's usually emphasis on kind of like the idea it's a fundraising campaign and kind of like thinking about the donors, but we thought, how could we honor the artists? Definitely one way of approaching would be to somehow think about utilizing the art they create, but very quickly we realized we could represent the artists through the tools they use to create the art. So in discussions with the client, they became like really great collaborators where they, on our behalf, contacted all of the artists involved with while they were still creating the art and told them, hey, when you're done with your art, would you mind providing the tools you use to create that art? So this example of artist Laurie, and you can see from her painting, she utilizes very thick paints using palette knives, and on the right are in fact the knives she used, and you can even see the colors and paints on the tools and how they match the artwork next to it. So we thought if we just focused on the tools, that would create this beautiful yet very iconic graphic representation of the artists themselves. And here is kind of like the range of collateral we designed for the auction. There's a range of like print materials. There was on-site signage. There was social media campaign and so on. And it says something about creating a very simple kind of idea. Like in this case, we're showcasing the tools artists use to make the art they donate. on one hand can sound very, almost boring, it's too straightforward. Too, you know, is this going to get boring? This campaign, runs for about, 6 to 8 months, but you can see it's all about the execution details. Like we use the great still life photographer Vicky Lamb to shoot the objects in a soft, kind of like the look of natural daylight to give a warmth to the tools, and then really accentuate the kind of well-worn character of each tool. And and then working with the client to get as many tools from as many artists as possible. It meant we could develop a huge series of still life photos that we could use across all sorts of deliverables. For example, at the event itself, at the auction, something that's a bit of a perfunctory, bit of a throwaway deliverable are these bid cards. If you've never been to an auction, to kind of indicate that you'd like to place a bid on an item, is you typically hold up a card or a paddle with a number on it, and that number is associated with a specific person. So that's how they identify who's bidding. Um, um, Normally, this is kind of printed inexpensively and is meant to be disposable. But because we built up a library of these like artist tool still lifes. We were able to have a great way of showcasing all of these photos. So on the other side of these bid cards, which is normally blank, we printed I can't remember the exact number, but there was like dozens of these different photographs on each back. So a great outcome was or anecdote from the client was, at the end of the evening, usually these cards are disposed of and they're kind of litter the ground within the event space. But at at the event in 2019 that we designed these materials, almost none of these were left behind, showing that people really engaged with and understood the idea of these how each card was unique, and many people kept them as keepsakes. So kind of the key takeaways from this project could be this idea of to not be afraid to, being literal is considered like a put down or critique of something, but to sometimes like to kind of lean into that. There's nothing wrong with, a very literal representation of your concept. It can, that kind of very direct, visualization of your idea can be, very profound and very impactful. And even with such a very straightforward system, this campaign is going to feature a bunch of artist tools. It can be elevated through its execution, and you can create something that's very diverse and very engaging. For the next project is back to another editorial project, the business of graphic design. We were approached by the Association of Registered Graphic Designers, the Rgd, our design industry association in Canada, to redesign their handbook that goes out to graphic designers, students, and studio owners. Maybe as students, many of you already have seen or know about the handbook. If you know, it's very comprehensive book on all aspects of graphic design, from starting out, getting your first job, all the way to veteran studio owners and going into kind of like best practices for the administration and management of a design studio. Each chapter in this book, there's 8 chapters, had a different contributor. And as you can see here, these kind of like the kind of screenshots of these various manuscripts, the text as they're provided, you can see all sorts of different formatting, different levels of hierarchy. There's all sorts of like complex kind of like formatting with bullets, numbered lists, subheads, subheads, and even like, 3-level deep of hierarchy. So one of the first things in a big editorial project is evaluating the content itself, understanding not just from a content perspective, but even from a structural and hierarchical perspective. Then once that is like kind of more fully understood, then you begin, you know, building the building blocks of the book. So you start with the kind of underlying structure, the grid. With this book, we happen to kind of land on a 6-column grid. And so let's see how this kind of played out in the book design. Here's the first chapter. So in terms of book structure, you kind of have like, from the outside, you have like the cover, then the book's kind of divided into a number of sections or chapters. And then, so you will need like a chapter opener. And then you have the kind of like, the typical pages. So this example of the opener, it features an accent color. Every chapter, we commission a different artist or illustrator or photographer to provide the imagery. So that helps visually differentiate each section through color and imagery. And then leading off in terms of text, we have kind of an introductory statement. And then throughout, you can see the use of the grid here. For these typical pages, the main text block takes up, 4 of the 6 column units of the grid. And meanwhile, that leaves 2 of the 6 columns for a very wide margin. And we use that margin really strategically, given the deep hierarchy that the text had. We use the margin to house the main headings, so they were kind of outdented into the margin. And then going further, that means here's a good example. So it means in terms of typographic contrast or differentiation, we don't need to have every level of head formatted differently. This kind of emboldened style and size, we can reuse for a subhead. So we're relying on the reader to understand through the space, the positioning and context, that even though these are formatted the same, where they're positioned, one is acting as the sub or the child of the parent head. The wide margin allows us to have space for these kind of like call outs that kind of add to the engagement of the user. The wide margins also allow us to do kind of these kind of very kind of detailed typographic formatting, such as having bullet points that hang outside of the margin. That kind of detail, what it does is it creates like that cleaner left edge, whereas the more typical, the bullets along with the text get indented, so it creates a noisier kind of layout. So given all of the content, we wanted the reading experience to be as smooth as possible. Here's another chapter as an example. As you can see, a different theme color, different kind of imagery. In this case, photographs by Chris Tomitis, to go along with this chapter on different types of how to run different types of design consultancies, like from big and small. We thought it'd be a great idea to actually show the insides of various design studios. Here's a good example of how having a very clean, very rationalized typographic system allows us to still have different amounts of differentiation. Here again, with the large margin, we can for numbered lists, the numbers can hang out to maintain that clean edge. In this case, this chapter had like a sidebar, so to differentiate a sidebar page from like the main flow of the main body copy. We use color. We use a 2-column grid setting. Again, because we use the underlying 6-column grid, it can be divided into 2 easily. And then finally, we get to the cover. Something in kind of a principle we like to adhere to in our studio is like we talk about designing from the inside out. So usually, like or even instinctually, to many designers, when they design something like a book or even packaging, a brochure, you tend to design, from the big high impact parts of the design. So like the cover or the exterior of a package. But sometimes then there's sometimes a disconnect from going from the cover to the inside, because like on the cover you relatively have less constraints, you have less content to deal with. A cover is generally a one-off situation. It's not like designing the grid that has to work across 200 to 300 pages. So if you design from the inside out, I find that opportunity of like, that time you're spending understanding the content, grappling with its structure, taking the time to actually read the content, it gives you a better perspective to start when you do start on these more high profile parts of the book, like chapter openers, or in this case, the cover. So I think from the outset, we definitely had this in mind. The cover should be quite graphic and bold, but quiet enough that, as a reference, but it could sit beside, on someone's desk, and utilized quite frequently. So the idea was it wouldn't be too obtrusive at the same time. However, when we're designing the book, we realize like there's so many aspects to becoming a graphic designer, so that we had this idea like maybe we show that complexity in a hidden fashion, so that the cover itself is a kind of like a physical manifestation of what designers do, in terms of how we disguise or hide or minimize complexity, or as a graphic designer, becoming a graphic designer, the work involved in being a graphic designer is sometimes hidden from like, seeing the final result. So we worked with illustrator and lettering artist Ben Weeks, who kind of has this very naive, sketchy, loose style to create this large kind of like whiteboard sketch of what it means to be a designer and all of the steps it takes. and it was printed through a clear gloss varnish. Um, so that you get this effect of, on one glance, the cover looks quite plain with just a solid red, but in the right lighting, as you move the book, you'll see that sheen of the varnish reveal itself. So some takeaways from this project would be, if the content is complex, the design shouldn't appear to be complicated. You want to, help disguise that complexity, and make the content itself much more approachable and accessible. You don't want to turn away people. And another takeaway would be, you can create smoother reading experiences through, a quieter, more minimized typographic contrast. For example, minimizing the different, using different fonts or mixing, different sizes and weights. And what that allows is when you do have that contrast, they stand out more instead of this idea, like, of this kind of continually escalating, amount of emboldening to kind of, once you have so many levels of heads and each one has to outshout each other. And lastly, as mentioned, try working from the inside out or from the deepest part of the content out to the higher profile areas, so that you have a better basis to represent, what's to come. And here's the final project I'd love to share with you. It's a visual identity for a brand new performing arts prize called the Johanna Prizes. It was named in honor of Johanna Metcalf. Here she is, I believe, on her university graduation day. She was a lifelong patron of the arts, was a philanthropist, along with her husband, founded the esteemed Metcalf Foundation, very well-known, respected private foundation. She passed away in 2018, and the foundation, to honor her, developed this prize for the performing arts. Other places around the world have well-known prizes, such as like the Tony Awards in the States for theater. But Ontario, we don't have something, so they recognize this is a need that they wanted to fill, and what better way to honor her memory. In talking with Joanna's daughter, we got a lot of information about Joanna's life, her, her sensibilities, her personality. Something that became quite clear was she was a very classy woman, very sophisticated, had, tendency to, very minimal, very classic design. So from the outset, a challenge for us was to develop an identity for this prize that's in keeping with her aesthetic taste, but at the same time exciting, and captivating, given it's about the performing arts. So something like, in this case, the scan of a written note from a greeting card shows, like, someone's signature is a very common kind of visual motif used in logo design, incorporating, the founder's signature or writing. But the challenge here was Johanna's signature, although in handwriting is quite distinct. Unfortunately, her name is not quite legible. And here's another example. This is like the best specimen that our client was able to find. This, if you didn't know it said Johanna, you wouldn't have known that. there's also that, you've now graduated from design school, in terms of production, in terms of reproduction, that, vector line artwork, where you don't deal with resolution is the best way of constructing logos so that they can be used across a wide variety of uses. So our challenge was, we love the idea of using her signature as part of the logo, but we ourselves aren't lettering experts, who would just basically transform this scan into usable vector art, and then who could we get to kind of like sensitively, modify the signature that so it's still in keeping the spirit of her handwriting, but could also be legible. Here is kind of like a presentation, a page from our presentation where we show our kind of rough concept and utilizing that kind of found signature. So we realized this is not something we could handle in-house, so we created kind of like a short list of lettering artists we could approach. And, given the prominence of, this is going to be an award that would, go on for, indefinitely. The logos featuring the signature, we realized we needed like a really, top person that could work with us to improve the lettering. So it was kind of our design director, Alina, that kind of just said, let's, why, let's dream big, let's go for the top. And as many of you know, Jessica Hish is one of the most foremost lettering artists around. But you never know until you try. I assumed she wouldn't be available, or her budget would be outside of our clients. But we contacted her through her artist rep, and by fluke, she happened to be available. She liked the project and the client, and she agreed to work with us. So this is kind of like our initial brief to her. And here's a glimpse of Jessica's kind of process. This like very early round of sketches where she's just getting used to writing out Johanna's name, trying to retain the spirit of the handwriting, but at the same time improve legibility. As the rounds go on, and there's obviously a lot of feedback from the client and the daughter of Johanna, where, certain details were, strayed too far from the original. Legibility, where's the balance of, keeping it very stylized and yet having it legible. So as you can see here, the kind of markups we provided sometimes got very, very nitpicky, very, very detailed. But Jessica was great to work with. She's so professional, always, very accommodating, and and in the end, this is what we ended up with. And see, it's very smooth, so there's no resolution issues. At minimum, that's kind of like the basics. But from there, you can tell there's a certain vitality to it, and yet at the same time, the name is very, very legible. And here are some examples of the kind of collateral material we designed. Here are the certificates that go to the winners. Here's some event signage. You can see featuring Johanna's signature as a visual element. Here's the cover of the program guide. And another aspect of this project was, how do we, as much as we're honoring the legacy of Johanna Metcalf, we're obviously also paying, we're trying to highlight and feature the winners of this prize. So a unique aspect of the Johanna Prize is that for each winner, they, as part of their prize, they got to select a protege who would also get awarded a prize and even a cash prize. So this idea like the winners get honored, but they in turn get to kind of like pay it forward um, um, to a protege. So we knew that we would definitely need a series of portraits to capture each of the winners. So again, in keeping with that idea of doing something very classy, we had the general idea of having the portraits shot in black and white. But then to play up that theme, we came with this idea that the mentors would be shot against a black background, and then the um, the 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 proteges would be shot against a white. So that would visually differentiate between the winner, the mentors, and the proteges. The portraits were taken by Luis Mora. He's a regular collaborator with our studio. He takes such beautiful, distinct portraits that really capture the essence of each person, and he's able to capture, in this case, kind of like each person kind of in motion as if they're performing, which is in keeping with the prize. And here is kind of the signage at the event where you can see all of the portraits of the winners of the pairs of mentors and proteges, and how it creates this beautiful, cohesive series of portraits. And then that kind of black and white background to identify the proteges and mentors. And then here's kind of at a glance all of the various collateral pieces and how the portraits and the Johanna signature logo lockup and the typography all kind of come together, through the printing, social media, not shown here. The logo itself was animated at the event. There, during the presentation, there's motion graphics involving the photography. So this is very much a team effort. Our studio being primarily print-based, we definitely needed to work with a lot of collaborators to fully realize our vision for the identity. And so that's definitely a key takeaway that it's hard as a young designer. You don't get that opportunity or even necessarily have the resources, but it's something you should build towards. Like you can't do it all. It's great to be at a point where you can collaborate with people who specialize in different parts of the creative, like from a photographer, like in our case, the photographer, lettering artist, even a photo retoucher to make sure all of the photos look beautiful. In this case, the rich black and white look we wanted. To the printer, the animator worked on the motion graphics with us, and so on. And and all of that builds together towards this idea that even with a simple design, the execution of each element is paramount. So that's kind of those are all of the projects. Going back to what Albert Einstein said, that idea of if you can't explain it simply, perhaps you don't understand it well enough. So to kind of relate that back to design, I'd like to say if you can't design it simply, you don't understand it, the content, the client, or the audience well enough. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed seeing our work.
Thank you so much, Gilbert, for sharing your insights with us. I think I speak for all of us when I say it's so inspiring to hear your perspective. on design in your work. I kind of want to begin this question and answer session by going back to something you said at the very beginning of your talk, which is this idea that simple doesn't necessarily mean compromise. And I'm curious because a lot of us are graduates and entry-level designers listening in. How do you know when you've arrived at a solution that strikes that balance between being modest and visually engaging? And then to counter that, how do you know when you've sort of gone too far and maybe revised too far?
No, that's a great question. It's hard, and that's where working with a team helps you get the perspectives of, in our case, like the various designers in our studio. And for us, it's really important that we consider the client as part of the collaboration team. So that idea of fully understanding a project. In most cases, obviously the client is that they're the ones that are most familiar with their project, the context for the project, their audience. So there's a bit of a negotiation. There's oftentimes sometimes we're on the other side where we're pushing for a simpler, execution, and it's the client wanting, can we enliven this? Can we make it more, captivating? And then we have to argue on the side of the audience, their audience, and say, look, your audience is really sophisticated. You want to stand out. I think you can develop a much stronger, confident tone through a more pared back, design solution. So in terms of gauging when do we hit that right balance, I think that comes through experience, where there are times when things get too pared back and the concept isn't clear enough, and then you immediately get feedback from the client, or even hear secondhand, like people who've actually directly viewed your work, that they didn't quite get it, or they're asking a lot of questions. So that's usually a key thing, even from the outset, like at a very early design presentation. If we start showing some, we try to do this very choreographed presentation, sometimes clients will kind of stop us and they just say, oh, I love it, like before we even fully explain the concept. That's usually a great key, that not only is the concept clear, but in how we visualize it is hitting the right marks.
But something else I was going to mention is, it seems very clear to me that this idea of storytelling is very central to your work. And I'm curious, when it comes to working with clients and you get a project brief, is that story always clear, and do they come to you with a clear direction for how they want it to be told, or is that more on your responsibility to dig those out and sort of put that together?
It can range. Sometimes clients have especially clients who have a lot of experience, like working with designers, they produce a lot of materials. They're often, they come, more fully prepared. Their briefs are a little bit more specific. Whereas we have clients, sometimes, or it depends on even the stage they're coming with us, coming to us. Sometimes they're, at the very, very formative stage of their project, and they just need, they want to start that dialogue, and we become part of our responsibility is actually to help them create that brief. And that is actually a very, I wish that happened more often, because sometimes clients can get kind of almost like locked into some specific idea, and they're not even open to other ideas at such an early stage. So that's so yeah, it can really vary.
Have you had experiences where clients are maybe reluctant to going too simple? How do you convince them about that being the correct and most appropriate solution?
Sometimes, like if it's a branding project, there's often as part of a presentation you do this kind of competitive landscape audit, so you kind of show what other people are doing. So, in many cases, like, we can show like a quieter, more confident approach can better position you amongst, your competitors. Um, Sometimes, if it's something like an editorial project, that tends to be a bit more iterative. Like it's rare on a big book project you have the design, fully conceived from the get-go. It usually develops over time, and usually in that development, um, there will be sometimes concerns raised over like something's not clear, or like I wish something stood out more, or maybe the structure of the content's clear. So in those cases, it's really as you work through the project, and you iterate, you hopefully, as you gain more understanding of the content, you're able as a designer adapt to that understanding, and um, not be afraid to constantly tweak and reevaluate your design. That's another really hard thing to kind of develop as a young designer. It takes a lot more experience and confidence to say, you know, it's kind of like it's not over until it's over. So to be as a designer your own hardest critic, to be have that objectivity of your own work to say, the client's bought off on this, it's mostly working, but something's been nagging at me, and only now I kind of can see it, and not be afraid to say, even if it means a lot of extra work, to just say, no, this is clearly better. Obviously discussing with the client, and then having to redo in some cases a lot of work, but all for the improvement of a project.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Do you have like any more advice for people who are maybe interested in pursuing like a studio that specializes in editorial design? Like, what advice would you give them to reach out to these places?
Well, some general comments would be like, regardless of the kind of studio you're interested in, always do a lot of research in the work they do, and if it aligns to what you're interested in, then obviously in how you communicate with them, you have to show your how about the studio's work, and then relate it to your own interests. The hard part with particularly editorial is most young designers don't get a lot of experience with that, particularly book projects. You know, Most young designers, if they go to finish design school, they might have done a book cover project. They might have done some like a sample chapter, or in magazine design, you might do like a feature or two or a cover. It's rare that someone has had the experience to design like a full book or magazine project. So I find I don't I tell young people not to be stressed over that. So in our case, I don't ever really assume that someone's necessarily even designed a book. I look at more kind of fundamental things, like obviously typography is key in like our project. So does this young designer show like a keen interest and almost like passion and devotion to typography, um, especially typography for long form reading as opposed to more expressive forms of typography. That definitely can weed out a lot of people, because it's a kind of a rare thing to develop for a young designer, that interest in the kind of boring side of typography, that long form reading side. And then another part, as demonstrated through the presentation, is people's interest in the content they're working with. So that's usually evidenced through seeing some process work, or just hearing people's, rationales and explanations of their project. That can go a long way to demonstrate, oh yeah, this person's very curious. So they'll love, learning about something new for a project. So these are kind of those things where these more fundamental parts of design, those are the harder parts to kind of teach within a studio. Whereas like some of the practical or even production related issues around, in our case, book design, those can be easily explained as a project goes on. There's often time where, I can sit down with designers and say, dealing with a complex table of contents. We can do a little mini workshop in the middle of studio day. Or some detail in terms of like typographic formatting. Those are relatively simple things to go over and learn and teach in a studio. But how to get someone more passionate about learning things or being curious or loving, like learning to the details of typography, that's something usually someone either brings with them or doesn't quite have. So I would focus on that, the fundamentals that are applicable.
It's interesting too, you said about like learning by physically doing it, because I'm curious with the pandemic, we're obviously not working in studio environments and you lose that sort of physical collaboration. And especially in your world, which is very print heavy, have you noticed any significant changes to your realm of work since working at home, or how has that experience been?
That's been the hardest part. I say this all the time. People like design on screen and they think they understand scale for something printed, and it's always the case. Even for me to this day, when I first print out even early sketches, I'm always like surprised myself, like, oh man, this type is like tiny, or this is like humongous. Like, it's hard to really get a sense of scale. So that's the biggest thing with dealing with typography. So with everyone remote working, but I'm here by myself in the studio, so often I have to remind them to say, hey, if you guys want something printed, send me a PDF, I can print it, and then I'll be your eyes, or I'll courier something to you. Like so that's been a thing that I have to constantly remind myself and remind the other designers here that we still need to print stuff off, especially at the early stages before we lock into anything. It's an unfortunate thing, that something that is almost like running water, where you can just like print something at a snap and 2 steps away from your desk. Now that it's like this like challenge.
I know what you mean. Like with my own thesis project too, I found it was sort of a learning curve. You had to realize, just because we're at home, it's still important to print it out if you're going to do it. You have to see these things at the small details. From a collaborative perspective, especially with clients too, especially with, like, for example, your Art with Heart campaign or project, where you're like collecting these items and scanning them in and doing that. That's another aspect of physicality that I think is missing now with the pandemic. Have you noticed that there's been any shift with collaboration between clients, or what does that look like?
Not really. It's funny. Most of our clients are Toronto based like ourselves, and even before the pandemic, we didn't always necessarily meet face to face. It's almost, we took it for granted. So only now during the pandemic it gets heightened, like, oh, we have to meet through Zoom. But in terms of the things working with the clients or our collaborators, a good example is actually the Rgd Handbook. It was originally designed in 2005, 2006, but just a few months ago we actually did a kind of a revision, and that one chapter I showed with those illustrated portraits of young designers, that's brand new imagery just for this edition.
Hmm.
That chapter originally had photographed portraits of young designers. So that was a very practical thing. Given COVID, there was no way we could, necessarily have, in studio portraits taken. But that opened things up. Rgd is growing more and more national. So in the the original version of the book, all of the portraits, for just practical reasons, everyone was Toronto based. But now that we kind of settled on this idea we would use illustration, the designers we could feature could be across Canada. So that was a benefit. We could make the representation much more diverse, like geographically speaking. So in that case, we turned what was like a negative of the pandemic to something positive.
That's awesome. I think we're going to transition into some audience questions. It looks like we have a couple.
Sure.
So we have one question that asks, thank you for doing this talk, Gilbert. Love seeing all the wonderful work. I was wondering if you had any advice about taking a complex concept and simplifying it down to be more approachable.
Yeah, that's the crux of all design, really. How can you make something much more approachable, accessible? So something I didn't mention in my presentation. Another thing that's always been in the back of my mind is we're lucky as a studio that most of our clients are in fact organizations or companies we're already an audience or customer of. For example, we do a lot of work with Art Gallery of Ontario. So in that case, like as an example, I would approach like a book project as if I was browsing their bookstore, or I just finished attending an exhibition. What would attract me to the book, or what about this artist I didn't know that I found really interesting, and as an audience member would intrigue others as well. So I really think of it in terms of instead of just necessarily our client's point of view, we think of it in terms of our client's audience's point of view, or their audience or our client or customer point of view. So that idea, like the audience doesn't necessarily could know anything about the topic or the client or the brand. So how in our design, how in what we communicate, can we show a light or inform the audience about that aspect of the project? So put yourselves in the shoes of the audience is a good starting point, for sure.
Very good advice. I think we have time for one last question. Jasmine asks, loved all the work and insight on everything. Do you have any advice for designers looking to specialize in editorial design?
So we touched on that. It's one of the kind of aspects of design, back in the day, like when I was in school, editorial design was definitely like one of those core courses you take in any graphic design program. But more and more, as there's other kind of avenues for design, other specialties like motion, UI, UX, and so on, that editorial has got a bit minimized. So I would just say, even approaching something like a corporate communications piece that could be like an annual report or a brochure, you can approach it less from a marketing standpoint and think of it as an editorial project. Like, what is the story of the brand you're trying to tell? What, in addition to text, what can I utilize to tell that story? So you think about imagery, you even think about material choices, the format, all of these parts of design that can be utilized to tell a story. So that'll get you thinking in terms of editorial, and then and all I can say is like I myself like started out doing kind of personal projects. So give yourself a personal project, like design a book for yourself, create a book, be the author of a book, of your own book project would be a great way to start.
Okay, so it looks like we have one last question, more of a fun one. Dominic asks, hi Gilbert, a quick question. Your single most favorite ice cream flavor in Toronto right now? Thank you.
Well, just the other week, there's a brand new ice cream shop in Kensington Market, Boho Gelato. All of their gelato that I was able to sample is very creamy, very tasty. But in particular, I had their dragon fruit. So the thing with fruit, since it's a lot of water, it's a real test of the gelato maker if they can keep it as smooth and creamy as something like a nut-based or something like chocolate, which is inherently creamy. So their dragon fruit not only tasted of the fruit, but was also very, very creamy.
Well, I'll have to try that out someday.
Yeah.
So it looks like that's all the time we have for today. But thank you very much for talking with us and sharing everything. I just want to let everybody know before we wrap up that tomorrow we have another round of speakers giving presentations, and this carries on throughout the week. So if you want to register for these, please go to the School of Design website that's going across the bottom of the screen. And make sure you follow us too on social media at SOD_yes. So thanks again, Gilbert. It's nice meeting you.
Thanks, Brandon. Bye.
Bye.